How did you know you had married the wrong person? What did you do when you realized it? Basically the title. What was the moment of revelation? What did you do afterwards? Did you stay or go? Why or why not? As I walked down the aisle thinking this is the biggest fucking mistake of my life. Pregnant at 19, I caved to family pressure to do the right thing. I had a stillborn 2 weeks later. I left 18 months later, 2 days after he threw me down the stairs and choked me. I realized it was entirely possible he would kill me. After we were married, I would lay in bed and keep wishing I could go home. When I noticed that I cry a lot and we don't talk much, I didn't do anything because I was in denial. My ex-husband didn't dance with me at our wedding Lamau. So that was a good indication. When a neighbor told me they could hear us talking in our kitchen from their house and I found out he had bugged my house. Kicked him out the house and he never came back. When I would sit in my car reading a book for an hour rather than go home. Divorced after 8 months. When I would be so happy when he left for work and so miserable when he came home. I had many online friends I'd game with and I tried to get him to join us but he was so socially inept and rude that I realized he was making my friends uncomfortable. So I would game with him in secret while he was at work because he'd always mope if I spent time with anyone and he wasn't there because he didn't have friends. I stayed like that for over a year but we called it quits 4 years ago. When they didn't defend me. When I wasn't supported and when he was happy to sleep beside me for 2 full years without so much as interaction. If I didn't instigate it, then it didn't happen. When I realized how much I gave into the relationship and it would never be enough. It was after my second child was born. He suggested she might not be his. She was 8 when I finally got divorced. In that time I tried everything to get us to a point of being healthy. He would put no effort in. Divorced in 2020 with a solid knowledge that I had tried everything. If I had to go back, I'd get divorced at least 4 years sooner. I knew it was over but didn't want to be a failure. Society needs to quit talking out marriage as failing. It's not a failure to leave an emotionally bad situation. Honestly, I realized 3 months after we got married. Then I stuck it out for another 12 years and put myself and my 3 kids through hell. Wish I would have been strong enough to leave back in the beginning. At our reception when he barely talked to anyone other than his best friend and snapped at me when I asked him to dance with when he didn't help with things when I was in labor after our child was a bunch of other stuff after. Well, I knew my ex-husband was the wrong person when I found out he had been cheating. I entertained the idea of staying if he cut contact with the woman he was cheating with, but he didn't want to do that, so I left. He bought out my half of all the stuff he was keeping, I paid him half of all the things I was taking. I kept the dog because I had him before we got together, and he kept the cat, a decision I regret having seen the state of my cat about a year after this all happened because the cat liked him more. I realized before the wedding but by then the social pressure had me pretty much locked in. It was either go through with the wedding or break up and disappoint everyone. I made the wrong choice. I kept thinking why doesn't this feel good the whole year we were engaged. Ended up calling it off. I am very thankful I didn't go through with it. I'd very much love to be happily married one day. I had a hard time believing it was possible after that. After many years and on the final try to make the marriage work. Moved to another city with 2 kids, no family, no resources for support. He moved us to go to school, create a better life. Things eventually fell back into same old pattern of BS. Ended up losing the apartment with nowhere to go, lived in hotels for 2 weeks before calling my mother for help. That was the absolute hardest phone call of my life. I knew nothing would change for that. When most interactions were ending with me crying, and him not offering a single bit of care or sympathy. Just wanted him to hug and reassure me. I never ever got it. That, and the trust was never there to begin with for valid reasons. Lasted 3 years married, 8 years as a couple. So embarrassing and quite traumatic. Officially never entering the dating scene ever again. I knew when I cried so hard thinking I was not ready to marry him. Before marrying him, I told myself it was okay. BC his parents told me that we were made for each other. We weren't. I didn't realize it until I started wanting attention from other men. Just felt disgusted at his lack of effort. He just shoved any issue he had with me under the rug and expected me to love him endlessly. I left him and I feel so much better now. Didn't get down the aisle, thankfully, but I ended it with my fiancé when his words finally sunk in. Those words being, don't ever expect me to change. Including his anti-vax, homophobic, transphobic, abusive behaviors. All but the first trait were decently well hidden, until things really started falling apart at the end. He was a nice guy, at first. Really sweet. I would have been fine with some of his bad habits, but those previously stated were inexcusable. He turned out to be not just slightly boring but staid and placid, and a middle-aged man at early 30s for whom life was finished fulfilled now that he was married. I left within the year. I'm just tired and grumpy all the time. Feels like I have an extra kid. I've almost married the wrong person. I've fully realized it when I started having a crush on another guy, which was absolutely against my principles, and emo shouldn't have happened in a happy relationship. I broke up, just to be honest with myself. But it took me 3 years to make this decision, as I really liked my ex's family, and we've been hearing since childhood that you must try to save your relationship despite all odds. Not married, but engaged. I realized it when I was forcing myself to smile around him. I didn't enjoy anything around him and dreaded speaking to him. I tried desperately to get into his hobbies and likes, but hated it. Luckily for both of us, we ended up breaking up before moving or marriage. Now I'm with a wonderful man who is the complete opposite to my last relationship. Everything Abraham. I love and enjoy his hobbies and spending time with him. Heart. I realized I had married the wrong person when they completely disregarded my feelings during their transition despite my initially supporting them. Finding out about the lying, alcohol, drug abuse just compounded the fact. A couple years later, but he had already beat me down mentally, emotionally, and made me feel worthless. Took 8 years, but when he finally got a job and left for work, I packed what I could with my friend's help and moved several states away. Filed for divorce. He did nothing like the calls for divorce with the judge. It was easy process for me and the best thing that had happened to me in the last 8 years of my life. I still get sick and thinking about how dumb I was and didn't see it. When he threatened me that I would never see my daughter again and would leave for hours on end with her without telling me when, where, or how, when I couldn't stop crying from postpartum depression. She was the greatest gift I could ever give him. I knew then I and neither her would ever be treated like we deserved. Started saving money. Waited for his work trip. Enlisted friend help. Moved to my parents while looking for a new place. Got new place, new job, began new chapter as a single mom. Hardest chapter of my life. But worth every single minute. When we were on our honeymoon, I looked around at all the happy couples and wondered when it was my turn. We went to couples therapy and I also went to individual therapy to sort out my feelings. We divorced 2 years later. First, let me say, I was in my 20s. No kids, no real estate. I knew 10 months into the marriage when our tax refund never showed up. Gambling problem. Divorced a month later. I didn't sign up for that. My routine became crying and vomiting in the shower, every morning. When he took our tax return to flip a car to help with extra income when money was super tight during COVID, and when we needed money to catch up on rent, he had already gambled it away. He SA me, and as soon as I could, I escaped to my mom's house and have been here since. But he wouldn't divorce me until he had secured his new GF. 2 weeks after the wedding he told me he wished he'd never married me. I thought, well, sometimes people say things in a certain mood that they don't believe later, and I still threw everything I had into the marriage. But looking back, that was the beginning of the end. When my ex was pissed that I was the caregiver when my Mill was dying of cancer. Ex wouldn't do it, but was pissed when I did. As I picked up the shattered pieces of the glass table that I'd been shoved into. Since I was 8 weeks away from delivering my second child, I stayed until my son was about a year old. Then I filed for divorce because he slept with my then best friend. The day after we married, his personality did a 180. When he told me he wouldn't have gotten married if he knew it would be like this, and I felt the same. Felt stuck until things completely broke. I feel like I'm not alone when I say, I knew before I married him. I knew when he threw me out a week after I miscarried our child with nowhere to go, but I've now been married to my second husband for 36 years come this March. He tells me every day how beautiful and sexy I am and how much I'm loved and appreciated. Definitely a step up, smiling face with hearts. I realized a month after settling into my new home in another country. He was a totally different person and suddenly didn't pay any attention to me. I stuck it out for almost 8 awful years because I felt so stupid. When I realized I didn't respect him and he didn't have interest in doing anything I wanted to do, and he stopped having sex with me because he was too tired, all of this, and then I started having feelings for someone I hadn't even met in person and wouldn't, they were in another country. We tried counseling and things, but ultimately I ended it. Found out before we were officially divorced that he had been cheating on me and lying to me for years. BFGF, not same as husband-wife, personally changed after marriage. I had no support from them when I wanted to better myself, And they ignored my declining mental health. Sex was woeful too. I asked for a divorce. We weren't married but had vague plans to get hitched sometime soon. I realized it was over when I started standing on the outer ends of the row in family pictures of his, thinking it would make it easier for them to crop me out later. I didn't immediately leave because I had a hard time getting used to the idea. Eventually he cheated, so the decision was kind of made for me.